When I was a child, we didn't have cell phones or iPads or iPods or MP3 players or iWatches or Xboxes. So I occasionally entertained myself with looking at, what are they called? A book. They're books. I looked at a book. One of my favorite books was the big family Bible that sat in our living room of my childhood home. And I'd look through the pages and I'd see the pictures and I'd dream of another world. And one of the pictures was of Jesus above a mountain, floating in the air, with Moses here and Elijah there. He's suspended in a flowing white and purple robe, outstretched hands, long brown hair, well-trimmed beard, really great teeth. The Bible was printed in Cleveland in 1950. The picture was like a divine selfie. Click. And it's like Jesus is saying, hey, this is where I live. This is where I'm from. This is where I'm going. And these are my two BBFs, or BFFs, my casa. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Heavenly glory, a timeless supernatural realm. This is it, with angels, lots of angels. Hi, Michael. Hi, Gabriel. Hi, Clarence. As a Bible student, I found throughout Scripture, God's self-disclosure often happens on a mountain. For example, on Mount Sinai, as we heard, when God gave the 10 Commandments. And he explained to Moses, then each month you'll receive a new set of commandments, cancel any time and keep the first set absolutely free. Or on Mount Horeb, when God spoke to Elijah, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the lightning bolt, not in a Chicago taxi, but God spoke in a still whisper. On this mountain, Jesus' focus will turn toward Jerusalem and the confrontation that will lead to the cross. On this mountain, Peter and James and John received confirmation of who Jesus was, his identity. And they all get a glimpse of glory. On this mountain, we have Moses on one side, Elijah on the other side, and Jesus prominently displayed in the middle, as if God is saying, I used to speak through the law and I spoke through the prophets, but from now on I'm speaking to you through my Son, my beloved. Listen to him. He is the message. Jesus is the inerrant word. Jesus shines with a bright rays of light. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white, a phrase laundry detergent companies would later borrow. Peter and his companions were very sleepy, it says. But when they became fully awake, they saw his glory. And I thought about how religious teachers through the years and generations and centuries, the Buddha, the Kabbalah, Hindu sages, and especially Jesus, are always telling us to wake up. They say, be alert, alive, awake, attentive, aware. What I like to call the AAAAA recovery program. Our journey toward God begins with awakening. You encounter the true God in your world and encounter the real you, your deepest, truest self, what many traditions call the soul. And you stop living from your small self and you start living from your true self. In God, where you stop labeling and categorizing and separating people into in-groups and out-groups. But you just see them. They're people. It's like in the movie Avatar. I see you, they would say as they greeted one another. I see you, which is in sign language means beautiful. And that's what you are. You are beautiful. Because he is beautiful, you are beautiful. We are beautiful. Our identity comes from within because God gives us value. And you want to love and you want to help others because they are valued too. That is being awake. And when you feel this aliveness in yourself and in all things, you are sharing and participating in something and someone larger. There is another world. It is not far away. Things are not what they seem. Like old enchanted stories about stepping through the wardrobe and or falling down a rabbit hole and having a tea party, or about how an ugly duckling is in fact a beautiful swan, we discover a new reality. That's transfiguration, when in Jesus time and eternity met. We human beings, we straddle the visible and the indivisible world all the time. We're bumping up to it all the time. I have a friend who experienced this suspension between two worlds when he told me that he went whale hunting off the coast of New Zealand, hunting for photographs, hunting for that experience. He said the whales would come up to the surface and they'd rest for a while and they'd breathe deeply a few times, and then creating the spectacular spout, they'd plunge about a mile deep into the water and feed on whatever whales feed on, squid. The whale would return to the surface about 45 minutes later for another big gulp of air. To the whale, most of its daily surroundings, like my house, our city, the highways, iPads, they exist in an invisible world. For the whale's eyes can only take in sights level with the waterline. The whale has its own life. It has its own world, plants and squids and sea creatures and mermaids and whatever. Yet unless it surfaces for oxygen once an hour or so, it will die. Though it knows little about the world above the sea, it needs vital contact with it to survive. And so do we. And that's why the story of the Transfiguration is there. It is our oxygen, lest our hope should die. There is another world. It is not far away. Things are not what they seem. Spiritual awakening begins with an experience of God. When I become aware of God's presence, it may come through beauty, like taking a stroll through the woods, or a beautiful organ postlude at church. It may come through struggle, a painful situation, a relationship problem, a scary diagnosis, where all you do is to lean on God. Spiritual awakening may come through a life change, a new job, a marriage, retirement, a new car. Okay, maybe not the new car. It may come simply by reading the Bible, a particular Bible passage, like it did for Augustine or John Wesley, whose heart was strangely warmed. It may even happen at church. Wow, think of that. As it did for Anne with an E, Lamott, who was raised an atheist. And as an adult, she found love and sobriety and Jesus and got baptized, and once explained in an interview, "I swear it was all an accident," she said. My first spiritual awakening came as a teenager at my girlfriend's house, having dinner with her and her family while casually playing footsie with her under the table. Until her mom stopped eating, looked at me and said, "You know that's my foot, right?" So I met Jesus that day. It can happen at the hands of a 9-year-old. Terry, who's not here, she gave our Lions Roar kids some prayer shawls that were the prison inmates, they knit together, a bunch of prayer shawls. She said, "Take one and give it to somebody who needs it." So Sam got his prayer shawl and put it in the car, and it sat there for about 2 weeks. And then he said, "I know who I want to give it to. I want to give it to that lady at Masonville who has the little dog," he said. When we got to Masonville, Alita, who has arthritis really badly in her hands, and she can't take care of herself by herself anymore. And she sat at the service that St. Mark's puts on every fourth Sunday of the month. And there was her little dog, Zoe, who wore a little pink sweater. Sam, after the service, walked up and gave her the prayer shawl. And he explained it was made by the prisoners. And Alita got all choked up and all emotional. She kept saying, "You don't know what this means to me. You don't know what this means to me." "I used to work at the prison," she said. "I spent many years talking to the inmates and encouraging them and praying for them. And now, when she needs it most, through this prayer shawl, it's like they were giving back." That was a beautiful thing. There is another world. It is not far away. Things are not what they seem. The Transfiguration story isn't about proving anything. It's about perceiving everything. I don't believe the Transfiguration because it's intellectually acceptable. I believe it to be beautiful. I mean, how could you intellectually demonstrate to me the beauty of Beethoven's symphony? How could you intellectually explain love, or the fragrance of hyacinths, or the sight of an early morning field filled with gossamers, or a Van Gogh starry night? This is a different kind of truth. This is a beautiful truth. It is an intuitive truth. There is another world. It is not far away. Things are not what they seem. In his old age, St. Peter reminisced about the mountaintop experience. He said, "It was like the eternal day dawned in my life. The morning star rose in my heart." I don't get that feeling when I read the New York Times. St. John, who was also there that day, he wrote about his impending death. He wrote, as an old man, he said, "What I will be has not yet been made known, but one thing is clear, I will be like him." I don't feel that way when I do my income taxes. I feel quite the reverse, actually. There is another world. It is not far away. Things are not what they seem. However, we cannot stay on the mountain. We have to climb down. We have to climb down into the valley of Lent next week. That's what Jesus did. And that's why we read this story every year at this time of the year, the week before Lent. So Jesus can show us that God didn't stay on the mountain. He didn't stay distant and removed, up there occasionally descending to work a little magic in our lives now and then. But God came down the mountain. And here's the thing. Jesus is going with them, just like he's going with you. He will go through us, to us and with us down the mountain in our life. There will be dark valleys, but something else is happening. Jesus is there too. Amen.